Of all the continents on Earth, Australia is the smallest, but it's also the only one that's entirely controlled by a single country. And while Australia is massive in size, it's surprisingly small when it comes to population. To put that into perspective, Australia is roughly the same size as the lower 48 states of the United States. Those states are home to more than 300 million people. Australia has just over 26 million. Let that sink in for a moment. An entire continent, with fewer people than a single large country's region. In fact, there are individual states in America that have more people than all of Australia combined. From a European perspective, England alone has more than double Australia's population. And it gets even more surprising. There are islands across the world, far smaller than Australia, that hold significantly more people. Places like Java, an island that's much smaller in size, yet home to nearly 6 times Australia's population. And then there are cities, Tokyo, Delhi, Jakarta, each of them larger in population than the entire Australian continent. So the question is, how can a place this big feel so empty? The answer begins with where Australians actually live, because in reality, Australia isn't evenly populated, not even close. Around 85% of Australians live within just 50 kilometres of the coastline. That means almost everyone lives on the edge. And once you move away from that edge, everything changes. The cities disappear, the roads thin out, the distances stretch, and eventually, there's almost nothing left. You can drive for hours without seeing another person. No buildings, no movement, just land, stretching endlessly in every direction. And that's where the real story begins, because this vast interior is known as the Outback. It covers most of the continent, and it's one of the most challenging environments anywhere on Earth. During the day, temperatures can rise above 45 degrees Celsius. The heat doesn't just surround you, it presses on you, it slows you down, drains your energy, and makes even simple tasks feel exhausting. But heat alone isn't the real problem. Water is. Because out here, water is never guaranteed. Australia has very few major rivers, and much of the land absorbs water quickly, before it can flow or collect. Even the country's largest river system, the Murray-Darling Basin, is relatively small compared to rivers on other continents. For example, the Mississippi River system in the United States carries more than 20 times the amount of water. Now imagine trying to build cities in a place where water itself is uncertain. And it gets worse. In parts of northern Australia, rain doesn't fall steadily. It comes in bursts, heavy rainfall, over a short period of time, followed by long stretches of dryness. One year, a region might flood. A few years later, it may barely receive any rain at all. That kind of unpredictability makes planning extremely difficult, not just for cities, but for survival. And then there's the land itself. Much of Australia's soil is incredibly old, worn down over millions of years, lacking the nutrients needed for large-scale agriculture, which means farming here is far more difficult than in many other parts of the world. So even if you have space, you don't always have the conditions to use it. And yet, here's the part that surprises most people. Australia actually has enough land and even enough resources to support a much larger population. So why doesn't it? Why isn't the interior filled with cities and towns? Like other continents, the answer isn't just geography, it's also history. For millions of years, Australia remained isolated from the rest of the world, drifting alone, separated by vast oceans. Even for humans, it was difficult to reach. The first people arrived here around 50,000 years ago, and for tens of thousands of years, they lived largely undisturbed. from the rest of the world. Then as sea levels rose, the land connections disappeared, and Australia became even more isolated. It wasn't until the late 1700s that permanent European settlement began, and even then, the population started small, very small, compared to the rest of the world. While other continents already had millions, Australia had only a fraction of that. And for much of its history, immigration remained limited, which slowed population growth even further. So while the rest of the world expanded rapidly, Australia grew slowly and unevenly, mostly along the coast, where conditions were easier, where water was more reliable, where trade was possible, and where survival was more predictable. Today, Australia is a modern, developed country with world-class cities, strong infrastructure, and a high standard of living. But even now, its population is still concentrated in just a handful of places: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide. Beyond them, there is space, a lot of space, but that space comes with a cost: distance, isolation, heat, uncertainty. In some parts of the outback, a single fuel stop can be hundreds of kilometers away. And if you miss it, you don't just lose time, you risk your life. If your car breaks down, help may not come quickly. Sometimes, not at all. And in those moments, you realize something important. This land doesn't adapt to people. People have to adapt to it. And not everyone can. Which is why, despite its size, most of Australia remains empty. Not because it lacks space, but because living there is incredibly difficult. It's a land shaped by extremes, by climate, by distance, by isolation. And maybe that's exactly what makes it unique. Because in a world that's becoming more crowded, Australia still has a place where nature feels untouched, where silence still exists, where the horizon seems endless, and where, even today, most people choose to stay right at the edge.